If you've ever been invited to a meeting called a quick HR catch-up, congratulations. You've probably survived one of corporate America's greatest horror movies. Mine was scheduled for 9:30 a.m. Subject line: brief discussion. Nothing good has ever started with those two words. Not once. I walked into the conference room carrying my coffee. HR smiled. My manager smiled. Security smiled. At that point, I was the only person in the room who hadn't rehearsed. I looked at the security guard. "Morning, Ben." He nodded awkwardly. "Morning." He avoided eye contact. Poor guy. He looked like someone had asked him to kick a puppy. I sat down. "So, who's getting fired?" Nobody laughed. Wrong audience. HR folded her hands. "Ms. Brooks, we've decided to end your employment effective immediately." I looked around the room. Me? My manager, Kevin Foster, finally spoke. "We're restructuring." I nodded slowly. "Interesting. Which part of restructuring requires security?" Ben quietly raised one finger. "In fairness." I asked the same question. I couldn't help laughing. Even HR had to bite her lip. Kevin didn't. Kevin had all the personality of an expired yogurt. Before I tell you how this 5-minute firing meeting accidentally became the most expensive HR mistake in company history, subscribe to Hidden Truth Chronicles, where toxic bosses eventually discover that paperwork has a better memory than they do. Now, here's what really happened. My name is Natalie Brooks. I worked as a senior software architect at Apex Workflow Systems. Fancy title. Simple job. I built tools that stopped other people from creating disasters. Sometimes I succeeded. Sometimes people ignored me first, then blamed the software later. Corporate tradition. I'd been with Apex for 6 years. Long before joining, I'd built a workflow optimization engine for a startup that never launched. The company folded. I kept the intellectual property. Years later, Apex wanted to use that same engine. Their lawyers proposed a licensing agreement. I agreed, but only after one sentence was added to my employment contract. If Apex ever terminated me without cause while continuing to use my licensed technology, they owed me $1.5 million. Not because I was special, because my software remained mine. The legal team signed it. The CEO signed it. I signed it. Then, apparently, everyone forgot it existed. Except me. And one very organized lawyer in legal. Kevin slid the termination letter across the table. There are instructions for returning your laptop, security badge, parking pass, and company phone. I looked down at the paperwork, then back up at him. "That's it." He smiled. "I didn't think you'd make this easy." I shrugged. "Kevin, I've had worse Mondays." He looked almost disappointed. I think he'd spent the entire weekend practicing his "I'm the boss" face. It still needed work. HR pushed a pen toward me. "If you'll sign acknowledging receipt." I signed without saying another word. Kevin looked surprised. "You're not going to argue?" "No." "Cry?" "No." "Threaten to sue?" I smiled. "Not before coffee." Then the security guard coughed into his sleeve. I'm almost certain he was hiding a laugh. As HR collected the paperwork, Kevin leaned back in his chair. "I'm glad we're handling this professionally." "Oh, we definitely are." He grinned. "I'll walk you to the elevator." Actually, I looked at the final page of my employment agreement. "I think someone should read page 17 first." Kevin frowned. "We don't need to revisit your contract." "I think you do." He folded his arms. "Legal already approved everything." "Did they?" I looked at HR. "Would you mind calling someone from legal?" Kevin sighed dramatically. "This is unnecessary." I smiled. "So is putting pineapple on pizza." But here we are. Ben left. I'm staying out of that debate. 5 minutes later, the company's senior legal counsel, Rebecca Lawson, walked into the room carrying a thick contract binder. She looked from me to Kevin, to the termination paperwork. "What's going on?" Kevin answered confidently. "Routine termination." Rebecca nodded. "All right." She opened the employment contract. "Let's make sure everything's in order." She flipped through several pages, then stopped. Her eyebrows slowly climbed. She looked at me, then at Kevin, then back at the contract. Kevin, did you review Clause 14? Kevin frowned. I reviewed the termination section. Rebecca didn't smile. I asked about Clause 14. Silence. She adjusted her glasses. For everyone's benefit, she began reading aloud. In the event the company terminates Ms. Natalie Brooks without cause while continuing to use any licensed intellectual property listed in Appendix C, the company shall immediately pay a contractual licensing termination fee of $1,500,000. Nobody spoke. Even the air conditioning seemed to stop humming. Kevin blinked. What? Intellectual property? Rebecca slowly turned another page. The workflow automation engine. The scheduling optimizer. The inventory prediction module. She looked directly at him. The software currently running nearly 60% of our operations. Kevin's face lost every bit of color. That's her software? Rebecca nodded. The company licenses it. He swallowed. I thought the company owned it. Rebecca closed the binder. That's what happens when people assume instead of reading.
Ben quietly whispered.
Ouch. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to stop myself from laughing. Kevin cleared his throat. There has to be a way around this. Rebecca shook her head. There isn't. If she leaves today, we owe her £1.5 million. I politely corrected her. Actually, $1.5 million. Rebecca smiled. Quite right. Kevin looked as though he'd just calculated that number in his head 3 times. So, we'll just stop using the software. Rebecca stared at him. You mean the software that manages customer orders, payroll integration, warehouse scheduling, and compliance reporting? He hesitated. Yes. She gave him a look usually reserved for toddlers who try to microwave forks. That would shut down half the company. Ben muttered under his breath. So, probably a bad idea. 10 minutes later, the CEO walked into the room. Rebecca handed him the contract. He read exactly 1 paragraph, then looked at Kevin. Did you know about this clause? Kevin quietly admitted.
No.
The CEO sighed. You fired one of our most valuable employees. Without reading her contract? Kevin didn't answer. There wasn't much left to say. The CEO turned toward me. Natalie, I'd like to apologize. I appreciate that. If you're willing, I'd like to tear up that termination letter. I smiled. That's a good start. He nodded. And effective immediately. You'll report directly to me while we review our management structure. Kevin's shoulders dropped. He already knew what that meant. 3 weeks later, he was gone. As for me, I stayed. Not because of the money. Because respect is worth far more than a contract. The funny thing about paperwork is this. People ignore the fine print, right up until it costs them $1.5 million. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to Hidden Truth Chronicles for more workplace revenge stories where clever contracts, quiet professionals, and toxic bosses discover that karma always reads the terms and conditions.